Hi, I'm Les Kiger, the creator of Practice Yoga Simply. Thank you so much for joining me. In this presentation, I'm going to share with you a general overview of yoga, a introduction to the Practice Yoga Simply approach to yoga, and why this practice works and what makes it so powerful and so life-changing for so many people. So, what is yoga? When most of us think of yoga, we think of smiling, beautiful, thin people all doing these wonderful postures and these amazing movements and this kind of thing. And that's one aspect, one facet, one piece of yoga and of the yoga world. But that's a pretty narrow definition right there. And what I want to do is really expand the way that we think about yoga. So, yoga is a complete practice for strengthening and suppling the mind, body, and the spirit. So, that definition that we sort of started with is really just a very narrow definition of strengthening and suppling the body. But it goes so far beyond that and has so many more facets for us sort of normal everyday people to benefit from. So it really is about strengthening and suppling. So it's about creating in the body more strength in the muscles, more strength in the connective tissues, more power, all of those kinds of things. And it's also about suppling. It's about stretching and loosening and releasing and those kinds of things. But that's not just in the body, that's also in the mind. It's in our habits of thinking, our modes of thought, our ways of going about life in the world, and in our spirit, in the ways that we interact um, and connect with ourselves and connect with others and connect with the world around us, connect with the universe in general. And the really powerful thing about yoga, which can literally be translated as union, is that it wraps all of this stuff together. It puts it all in one spot, and it gives you, when you go and get on your mat or in your practice space, however that works for you, you get like a little laboratory where you can do experiments and you can do training and you can um, learn how this all-inclusive practice works, and then you can take that everything that you learn while you're practicing quote unquote yoga and take it out into the world and into the rest of your life. And that's what makes this so powerful. So now that we have that working definition of yoga, let's look at this specific method of doing yoga, the Practice Yoga Simply method. So we practice 10 minutes per day or 10 minutes per session. That only needs to be 3 or more days per week. And in reality, if you can't even do 3 days per week, this practice can still benefit you. In my experience, there's kind of an inflection point at 3 days a week where stuff starts to change and shift a lot more quickly. And there's a benefit there to being able to practice at least 3 days a week. But even if you can only do 1 or 2 or once every other week, this practice can still benefit you. And that's it. There's no part 3 to it. So how can 10 minutes a day matter? We're so used to thinking that we need these big gestures and big movements, and that if we're going to do something that's going to create a big or a lasting change, that it has to be sort of grandiose. You know, if we're going to get some benefit out of yoga, surely we'd have to do it at least an hour a session, at least 4 days a week, right? Or 5 days a week, or 90-minute practices might be better. And I'm here to tell you that it's actually, for most people, I think the opposite of the case. Because what happens when we think that we have to make that kind of a grand commitment, it oftentimes stops us from even getting started. Or almost worse than that, we'll start and then we won't be able to maintain that huge of a shift. Fitting some practice like this into your life is it takes some adaptation. Other things have to shift around it. And if you try and put in this huge wedge of this big practice that you feel like you have to do to get started or even to maintain your practice, there's a lot of negativity that can come up there, and you can really self-sabotage that way. And this practice is only 10 minutes a day. A lot of people who practice it will do other practices, or they'll practice multiple times in a day, but that's all because as this practice gets going, then you start to want and crave more and more. But we start with the 10 minutes a day because the 10 minutes a day is enough when you practice consistently over time. And it sets you up for success. And if you're successful, you'll continue to be successful. You'll feel successful. You will act like a person who is successful in this practice instead of getting caught in these negative patterns. So there are two reasons why, in addition to all of that, that only 10 minutes a day can actually make big shifts. And those two reasons are keystone habits and the relaxation response. Briefly, a keystone habit is a particular type of habit which, when you get it going in your life, starts to shape the rest of your life and the rest of your habits around it, sort of out of proportion to the amount of time and energy that it takes. It's like a big fulcrum. And the relaxation response is the opposite of the fight or flight stress response that we've all heard so much about and has so much to do with our rushed, stressed society these days. So, the power of a keystone habit. Like I just said, a keystone habit is a particular type of habit that when you insert it into your life, when you get it going, it starts to shape the rest of your life around it. A keystone habit, every time you practice it, is like dropping a stone into a stream. And at first you drop a stone in and you don't notice any change. And you drop a stone in and you don't notice any. There's a little splash. The stream is still the stream. And then there's a little splash and the stream is still the stream. And a little splash and the stream is still the stream. Pretty soon though, you've dropped in enough stones that you shape the entire course of the stream around these stones that you've put into it. You change the whole quality of the movement of the stream. And the stream is your life, and this practice is that habit that drops those stones in. A keystone habit is any kind of exercise practice can be a keystone habit. Running, lifting weights, all that kind of stuff. Those are all proven by studies to be these kind of powerful habits, and people who have those kind of practices or start those kind of practices tend to make other really healthful, life-changing habits. Maybe quitting smoking, maybe changing their diet, maybe changing the healthiness of their social interactions and their relationships. And that's the power of a keystone habit, is it creates these other shifts. So how do we create a keystone habit? The reason that we're so concerned with habit is that if you have to do something through pure willpower alone, it's hard. And we want this to be as easy as possible, and we don't want you to have to think about it. And so that's why we want to turn it into a habit. We want to turn it into something that's an automatic part of your life and that just works for you instead of you having to work for it. So there's, I think, a study out of Duke University that's been popularized that says something like between 40 and 60% of the things that we do every day are habitual. They come out of our subconscious mind, and we don't think consciously about doing them. They happen because we've done them so many times and we're habituated. So what we want to do is hook our new habit onto one of those existing habits. And that existing habit is called an anchor. So we're going to choose an existing habit, preferably the stronger and more consistent, the better. So let's say you have a morning coffee every morning, and you get out of bed, you go to the kitchen, you turn on the coffee maker, you wait for it to brew. That time between turning on the coffee maker and your coffee being ready is the perfect place to insert this 10-minute practice, because you know that you're going to do that habit every single day. And so that's a really strong place to anchor. Just like if you think of a sailing ship and you're going to anchor in a cove, you want to make sure that your anchor is set down at the bottom and into a reef or large rock, something like that that's really going to hold it strong and tight. And that's the same thing that we want to look for in our habitual anchor. Another one that might work for you is maybe you come home at the end of your workday, you take off your work clothes, and then you shower to rinse off your workday. So in that time between taking off your clothes and showering, you just throw on your yoga clothes if you need to, go to your practice spot, roll out your mat or whatever. Preferably you already actually have it rolled out when you leave for work in the morning. Do your 10-minute practice and then go and take your shower. So you're going to hook your new practice onto this existing habit, and you're going to use that as the trigger so that every time you do that existing habit, then you're going to do your 10-minute practice afterwards. That's going to make it so strong and set in your life. The second thing that you're going to do to make sure that this really solidifies into a habit instead of being something that you have to use willpower on every single day is reward yourself for doing it. And I know it may sound a little silly, and it may not be, we tend to think that if something is worth doing, it should have just this intrinsic worth to it, and it should just be easy to do because it's worth doing. But when we look at those statistics about how much of what we do is habitual and subconscious, this reward isn't about giving yourself a cookie for something that you should just enjoy doing. It's about helping that subconscious part of the mind that manages these habits to get reprogrammed. And so, what I found is that people don't actually tend to care about the reward for that long. This practice gets built into their day, and then the practice itself is the reward. But at the start, to really get it going so that it's as easy as possible, so it's as ridiculously easy as it can be to get this practice going, it can be really powerful to do this reward. So in these two examples that we talked about already, the morning coffee and the evening shower, there's actually a reward potentially built into that situation already. You probably love your morning coffee if you're a person who does that, or your morning tea, or maybe it's a morning orange juice. But we tend to love our morning routines because they get us up and going in our day. And so any one of those things can be your reward for right after your practice. You get up, you turn on the coffee machine, you do your 10 minutes on the mat, you come back, and then you get to have that latte or that coffee or whatever variety is you like, or you have that tall glass of orange juice that you so enjoy every morning, or whatever that little reward is that's just really going to cement it in your mind, and it's going to make that subconscious part of your mind go, yeah, that was awesome, let's do that again tomorrow. That evening shower, that may serve the same purpose for you. Maybe you just love the feeling of that hot water after a long day. If you don't have one of those situations where there's an automatic kind of reward already built into your schedule like that, it's perfectly great to add some kind of extra reward. Maybe a guilt-free piece of chocolate. Maybe we had one of our original members who had all these photos that he'd taken sitting around on his computer, and he never felt like he could give himself the time to sit down and do the photo editing that he wanted to do to make him really look good. Well, his reward for doing his yoga practice was to get, 10 guilt-free minutes on the computer to where he didn't have to think that he should be doing anything other than working on those photos, and that worked awesome as a reward for him. The big thing is make the reward meaningful. Make sure that it matters to you and that you care about it, because that's what's going to cement it in your mind. Go for instant gratification, like I said, so that you get it immediately after the practice, because this reward isn't about something, it's not about bribing yourself to do the practice, it's about wiring up. It's about using the brain chemistry to get this cemented into your day. And the third thing, which wasn't on my original, 2 reasons that this practice works, but is that it's important to practice for a purpose. So you want to decide on at least one really strong reason that you're doing this for yourself. Maybe you rush around all day, making lunches, driving the kids to school, taking care of everybody else, and you really just deserve 10 minutes of quiet to yourself. Maybe you have some sort of injury or condition that tends to stiffen up your body, and you really just, for your well-being and your recovery, you need to have some kind of practice of movement and breathing for healing. Whatever it is for you, decide on that reason. Maybe you have always wanted to try yoga but never have. Or maybe you used to have a practice and it was really meaningful for you, but you lost it at some point. But figure out that purpose for yourself. Decide on that really clearly, because that's going to keep you, it's going to get you motivated, and it's also going to keep you going over the long term, and it's going to help you over any spots where the habit isn't working as strongly as it should. There are going to be places where your life is going to get rocked and things are going to happen, and in that case, it's really nice to not only have a really strong habit, but have a really strong purpose to bring you back. And the other important factor here is to pick someone else to practice for. So it's really important to have the reason for ourselves, but part of this practice is that it's going to improve the way that we can act in the world. And so when we pick somebody else to practice for, maybe it's our kids, maybe it's our spouse, maybe it's our pets, maybe it's the people that we work with, or somebody that we take care of, that we are caretakers for. But pick somebody, some purpose outside of yourself, some way that this is going to benefit the other people in your life. Maybe you really need this 10 minutes for yourself to slow down during hectic days. And then in addition to that being great for you, that's going to allow you to be more present with your kids or with your spouse or whatever that is. So I don't know exactly what that is for you, who that person is, what that reason is that you're practicing for them, but that's a really important thing to hook this onto also. So our second key factor was the relaxation response, which I told you is sort of the opposite complementary reaction in the body to that stress, fight, or flight response. Now, that fight or flight response, that stress response, has gotten a lot of bad play in the last few years. And I think the first thing to understand here is that the stress response is it's a really great thing actually, because there are situations where we need that reaction, and we evolved to have that reaction for a reason. And so we don't want to demonize that response, but we do want to have it only act in our lives when it's appropriate, and we also want to have a practice, because that stress response for so many of us gets activated so often, day after day after day. We want to have as part of our lifestyle a habitual practice like this 10-minute yoga practice, which activates the relaxation response in our body and habituates our body to slowing down and being relaxed and releasing relaxation chemicals and all that kind of stuff. So that's the second reason why this 10-minute practice is so powerful, because consistently over time, you're practicing this relaxation response in your body. You're slowing down in your breathing, you're loosening up in your muscles, you're slowing your heart rate down. And when this relaxation response is activated, they're finding as they study the body under these different states now, that when the relaxation response is activated, that's when your body can do healing. That's when your mind can do healing. That's when tissues can be regenerated. That's when the immune system is at its strongest. All of these kind of things that are so important, not only to our short-term well-being and state of mind, but to our long-term health and wellness. And that's the other really powerful piece of this practice. So in terms of getting started with this practice, like I said, 10 minutes a day, 3 days a week. That's kind of the minimum that we shoot for. Less is fine if you have to, but we go for the 10 minutes a day, 3 days a week. So you want to make and commit to a plan. Maybe your days are Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Maybe you're doing 5 days a week, every day that you work. Maybe you're doing Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, because those are your work days and you know that you can hook this practice into your work schedule and have it work well. Maybe you really want to go for it and commit to all 7 days. But whatever it is, pick a plan and commit to it. But don't be afraid to adjust that plan, both in the long-term and short-term sense. So if you have a week that just gets totally out of control and you need to drop some practices out, let that be fine. That's no problem. You can come back and do practices in the evening instead of the morning. You can just let go of a practice for a day or 2 days or 3 days and know that you'll get back to it. But you want to plan your yoga, but you also want to yoga your plan. And what I mean by that is that you want to be flexible in your execution of the plan that you make. As I said, this also applies over the long term. So maybe you start out at 3 days a week, and then you love it so much that you end up going to 7 days a week, and you do like 3 or 4 weeks of 7 days a week. And then life happens, and you just can't do that 7 days a week anymore. don't be hard on yourself about that. Don't think it's wrong. Don't think that it's any less to do fewer days. It's just a shift, and it's all part of the practice. And in those cases where it all goes wrong and doesn't work out, just smile. Just make it your practice to be like, funny that that happened. Too bad. I wish it had been different, but it wasn't. So I'm going to smile, I'm going to get on with my day, and I'm going to practice when I can. That's all. No big deal. So finally, before I let you go, I want to just recommend 2 books which apply directly to the topics in this presentation. So the first one is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And this goes into a lot of detail about habits, both personal habits, organizational habits, societal habits. It talks a lot about the keystone habits, which we just talked so much about. It talks a lot about changing habits in our lives and the power that habits have in our lives. It's a really fascinating read, and I highly recommend it. The other book is Mind Over Medicine by Dr. Lisa Rankin, and she is a conventionally trained physician who has gone on a journey of research and exploration, really legitimate research, to explore why people become ill and how they get better, and how that relates to the state of mind and how the state of mind relates to the body. And she got specifically really interested in the questions of why some people have spontaneous remissions from even chronic or terminal illnesses, and why some people who are doing everything possible right, quote unquote right, who have amazing diets and see acupuncturists all the time and get chiropractic work all the time and exercise a lot and all those kind of things, why those people who, according to our conventional views, are doing everything right for their health can still be very unhealthy, both mentally and emotionally, but also physically. And she talks a lot about the relaxation response and the role that that plays in our overall health. And I highly recommend that book for that reason. So thank you so much for joining me, not only for this presentation, but for this practice, which I'm so excited to help you get started with. Wherever you found this video, email, or webpage, or whatever, you'll find some more information about how to actually get started with the practice videos to watch, all of that kind of thing. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for your interest in practicing yoga simply. I hope that you have a great day and this practice serves you. Namaste.